Well, hey there, neighbor. Greetings on this muggy Wednesday. I hope everything's going well for you. I was doing a little reading this morning, doing a little study. I come across something, and I got kind of sidetracked on it. But I got a bag full of notes here that I've written down throughout the years driving around. I keep the 3x5 cards in my pocket, and then on my phone you can do the voice notes. I got all kinds of stuff that I need to write down or put in my Bible. But I was thinking about this passage in Daniel. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25. It's speaking of the Antichrist, speaking of the end time, and speaking of the devil and his crowd. And where is he? He says in Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 says, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High." Now, I think he's probably talking about the tribulation period, and he's talking about the end time. But like we said before, there's nothing new under the sun. The devil's, he's got a bag of tricks, and he just reaches in that bag and pulls out something and uses it. And he uses some of the same stuff, so we can learn from that. And so it says there, it says he will wear out the saints of the Most High. And I got to thinking about that, and it's kind of like, you keep on trying to live right, and he keeps on opposing you, and you keep on trying to live right, and you keep on trying to do right, and you're doing the right thing. But it just seems like sometimes it just seems like it's overwhelming. Sometimes it seems like it's never ending. And there's one thing about the devil, I'm gonna tell you, he's patient. He don't mind waiting. He don't mind saying, we live in an instant generation. We want it all to happen now. We want to we want to try, and if we fail, we quit, we give up. He ain't like that. He'll keep trying. He'll keep trying to tempt you. He'll keep trying to get you to fall. He'll keep trying to get you to stumble, and he knows what it takes to get you. He knows the temptation that you face and that I face. The Bible talks about the sin which does so easily beset us. We've got maybe a besetting sin that wouldn't bother somebody else, but it bothers us. And so, we've got to be faithful to the Lord, but it kind of gets old after a while. You keep trying and you keep going, and the devil keeps that daily pressure on you, and he wants to try to stop you with the daily pressure. It's not like it's a big blowout, and all of a sudden something's going to jump in front of you and try to stop you. That may happen, but it's a daily battle, and so we need that daily walk with the Lord for the daily battle. Now, we talk about being separate, and we're to be a separate. Come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. God wants us to be a separate people, but that separation is not necessarily physical. It's not like, well, we just gonna stay away from them. Now there is a place for that, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you can't be around them, but Jesus was, it says in Hebrews, Jesus was holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, made higher than the heavens, who needeth not daily as those high priests to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins, and then for the people's. For this he did once when he offered up himself. But what he says is, he says Jesus was separate from sinners, but the main criticism that the Pharisees had about him was that he was eating with sinners. So he could be with them, but not be of them. And we don't need isolation as much as we need insulation. We don't need necessary, but if you don't have the insulation, then you do need the isolation. In other words, if sin is a problem, if alcohol is a problem for you, then you need to stay out of the bar, which you probably ought to stay out of there anyway. But I mean, if sin, you got something that bothers you, then you need to stay away from that. But you need to be spiritual enough to where if you get around that, it doesn't bother you. But the temptation will come. The devil, he'll just keep on. He'll keep the daily pressure on. You'll have it at work. You'll have it at home or whatever it is. You plop down in front of the television set, and if you're not careful, before long, you're lusting, you're coveting, you're letting your mind drift. You got to be careful. And we're living in a world that's against God. And so we've got to realize that we live in a world of daily temptation. You know, it was the daily temptation that caused Samson to sin. And again, I want to play off of that word or that verse in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25 says, he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. It's like a gear. You keep wearing it and wearing it and wearing it until finally the gears don't mesh anymore because the gear's worn out. And over time it wears out. Well, that's what the devil's trying to do to you. He's trying to stop you. And it may be that temptation keeps coming and you keep facing the temptation over and over and over again. And if you're not careful, you'll stumble and fall. Now, if you think about Samson and Delilah, Samson resisted for a long time, but and he was strong. Samson resisted while he was strong until he wasn't strong. It says, and I'm not going to read the passage, but you can maybe look it up sometime, but in Judges chapter 16, verse 4 to 7, Delilah comes to him, and the Philistines had told Delilah, said, we'll give you some money if you'll figure out where his strength comes from, because Samson was not a muscular fella. You know, here's Pee Wee Herman doing the things that Arnold Schwarzenegger could do, and they couldn't figure out how he could do it. Well, he could do it because of the power of God and because he was obedient to God. And that's why they wanted to figure out what it was. Where's his power come from? Now, we know that his power came from being obedient to God and not cutting his hair. And that's what the Bible says, and that's what we believe. But he was supposed to keep that secret to himself. But I think it's 4 different times. And you talk about a fellow that's blinded by love. This guy's blinded by love because Delilah comes to him and she says, tell me where the secret of your strength lies. And he says, if you bind me with 7 green whips that were never dried, then I'll be weak and as another man. That's Judges chapter 16, verse 7. He said, he's about tie me up with new whips, new rope, whatever. And so she does it and says, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he breaks with it, kills the guys, and that ought to hey, buddy, wake up. Wake up, fella. She's out to get you. But no, he's blinded by love. So she comes to him again. Judges chapter 16, verse 10 and 11. And Delilah said unto Samson, behold, thou hast mocked me. But she's crying. You mock me. You don't love me. You told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, whether thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then I'll be weak and be as another man. So she comes to him again with another temptation. Hey, look, hey, come on, tell me now. Well, she does that. She tells it, she binds him, and it says the Philistines be upon thee, Samson, and they come in, and he whoops him too. Judges chapter 16, verse 13 and 14, this is the 3rd time. And she come to him, she whining, oh, if you love me, you tell me. We don't keep secrets, you love me, you tell me that. And Delilah said unto Samson, hitherto hast thou mocked me and told me lies. Tell me whether thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web, and she fastened it with a pin, and said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he waked out of sleep and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. And so, he gets away again. This is the 3rd time. Well, the 4th time's the charm. But my point is, she kept on and kept on and kept on. Listen to this. This is Judges chapter 16, verse 15 and 16. Judges 16:16 is a key verse. And she said unto him, how canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lies. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death, he finally told her. And he broke down and told her and said, if you shave my head, I'll be like everybody else. And she did, and he was, and he ended up grinding at the mill and dying, because she kept on. It says there, and daily, daily. And you may be strong today. You may think, oh, I can go to the bars today. I can hang around with the old crowd today. I can run around with the old druggies today. I can be with them. Yeah, you might be strong enough today, but what happens if you get caught at a weak moment? What happens if, your wife's out of town and the phone ain't working, and let's see who that is. That's nobody I need to answer. And, you're all alone, and here comes temptation. Well, you might find a weak moment And that's why you got to have that close relationship with the Lord. Separation from the world or the close relationship with the Lord, or both of them. You don't mind being separated from the world when you love the Lord. You go to Proverbs chapter 7 and the principle shows up again. Proverbs chapter 7 talks about a harlot, a prostitute. And it says that Proverbs chapter 7, she just kept talking and kept talking and kept talking. Now, her talking wasn't the problem. But when this young man started listening, that was the problem. But it says in Proverbs chapter 7, verse 21, with her much fair speech. In other words, she didn't just say it one time. She got talking about it. And she was talking about coming to see him. And it says, first of all, she caught him. And she caught him, and then she started talking. Well, how'd she catch him? Well, she used her body as bait. It was the bait of how she was dressed. She had the attire of a harlot. She had it all in the front window on display, and he was interested. Now, he might have known better, and he might have thought better, but he didn't do better. And she grabbed his attention, and when she grabbed his attention, she eventually got his affection. And 2 Peter chapter 2 talks the same principle. 2 Peter chapter 2, Peter's talking about Lot in Sodom. Now you remember the story of Abraham's nephew Lot. He's in Sodom. He pitched his tent towards Sodom, but by the time you get to Genesis 19, he's in Sodom. He sold his tent and got a house. And he was in Sodom, and Sodomites, that's the Old Testament idea of homosexuality, which is not right, never will be right. But you've got that going on, and he didn't see much wrong with it. He'd been around them for so long. In fact, I think he got elected to an official position in the government of Sodom because he was sitting at the gate. That's how they conducted business back at that time. And so, here you got Lot, and he's comfortable with the ungodly crowd. How did he get comfortable with that ungodly crowd? Well, it says in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 and 8, it says, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. In other words, he spent more time with the ungodly crowd than he did with God. And it vexes it. It didn't seem that bad. That's an alternative lifestyle. Or they was born that way. They got more of this chromosome and they got more of that chromosome or whatever, and it didn't seem so bad. And after a while, it just sort of wore him down. And you see, if you don't have that daily walk, the Bible says, give us this day our daily bread. It's supposed to be a daily walk with the Lord. And when you've got that daily walk with the Lord, you can be insulated from the world. I can take a wire and you can take a wire and let's run it out. We got a light out there. I'm gonna work on my car, and so I got a drop cord and I run it out there, and that cord can go out there. And as long as it's wrapped up good, it'll be fine. You can lay it through snow, you can lay it through water. It ain't gonna hurt nothing. But if the insulation is not there, if there's a bare spot, it's gonna short it out. It don't need isolation; it needs insulation. Well, you ought to be to the point where you can get out in the world and be effective for the Lord. But it takes that daily walk with the Lord. And if it's a problem, stay away from it. If it's a temptation, stay the heck away from it, and don't be hobnobbing with the hogs when you got a problem of wanting to go to the hog pen. Back in Genesis, Joseph was tested over and over again. You know about Joseph. He was sold into slavery. His brother sold him. He's taken down to Egypt, and he was sold into slavery in chains as a slave, and he ends up in this fellow by the name of Potiphar's house. Well, Potiphar is the captain of Pharaoh's army, and he's a well thought of fellow in the land of Egypt. But here's Joseph. He's a young man. I think he was 17 when they sold him into slavery. And so, he's a strapping young man. He's a handsome young man. And the Lord was with him. It says 4 times in Genesis chapter 39 that the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. So whatever was happening in his life, he didn't have the excuse of saying, well, the Lord must have forsaken me. He couldn't say, well, God's been so good to me and God's blessed me in so many ways, I'm going to live for the Lord. He is in the dungeon. He was a prisoner. He was a slave, but he had that relationship with the Lord. And so he's got that close walk with the Lord. He's got that close fellowship with the Lord, but trouble comes. He's a slave in Egypt. He's in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife decides that she wants to have sexual relations with him. It says in Genesis chapter 39, verse 7, it says, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Now, she may have dressed the part that day. You know, she may have dressed or undressed. I mean, you know, she's like, she wants him. And think of it, and it's not in the Bible, but I think it's true. It had worked with other slaves. You know, it had worked. There's never been a slave that told her no. You know, she's been Potiphar's wife for a while, and he's had handsome slaves before, and never bothered her before, and they've always succumbed, but not Joseph. So she says, lie with me, and he won't do it. So she comes along with the proposition, says, lie with me, and Joseph refused. He said, no way. Now listen. First of all, he tried to reason with her. Now, whether or not that's a smart thing to do, I don't know, but it kind of lays out an example for us, because it says in Genesis chapter 39, verse 8 and 9, it says, she said, lie with me, but he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? You know, he says, listen, let's be reasonable. You know, let's work this thing out. You're my owner's wife. It wouldn't be the right thing. He trusts me with everything in this house except you, and so let's honor him, and let's not betray his trust. He trusts you, and he trusts me, and let's not break that trust. And besides, it would be a sin against God if we did that. And he got away with it at least one time, because we see it there. And the next verse, verse 10, it says, and it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. All right, so at least one time between verse 9 and verse 10, evidently it worked. You know, he said, let's not do this, and he left and she left and everything's fine. But once she had decided that she wanted to do it, she wouldn't be deterred, and so she just kept on. And it says there in verse number 10, said, it came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day, every day it would come along. Every day that temptation would be there. And, you know, we face temptation. And you may face things at work. You may face things on the way to work. You know, maybe I kid about road rage being my besetting sin. I only have a problem with it when I drive in the car in Huntsville, and then all the people get out there, and it's kind of bad, you know. But whatever your besetting sin is, it's going to rise up. It's going to give you a hard time. It's going to give you problems. But if you have that daily walk with the Lord, it can keep you from doing that. But the question really is, how badly do you want to stay pure? How badly do you want to live for the Lord? You know, day by day, she's coming to him, and she's trying to catch him at a weak moment, and she's trying to catch him at a time when she can, you know, break him down. And she keeps on trying, and she keeps on trying, and that's the way it's going to be. You know, you're going to face some temptation that's just going to keep coming, just like Samson. You know, he was strong until he wasn't, and she caught him at a day when he wasn't, and he messed up. And, you know, this Potiphar's wife probably used that much fair speech like the prostitute did in Proverbs chapter 7. You know, the guy in Proverbs, he listened and fell, but Joseph refused to listen. You know, she would say, I mean, Joseph, you know, I'm getting out of here. Joseph saturated the place with his absence. And so Joseph recognized the danger that he was in. I mean, he's a young, healthy, red-blooded male. Almost said American man. He's a young, red-blooded male. And here's a beautiful woman. I guess she's beautiful. I mean, she could be ugly as a mud fence, but either way, he wasn't going to lie with her. And so I think Joseph, you know, he tried to reason with her, and then I think he tried to change his routine. You see, because it says in verse 10 again, it says, he hearkened not unto her to lie by her, nor to be with her. In other words, he he kind of worked his schedule around where he wasn't there when she was there. He tried to work his schedule around where when he was in the house she wasn't there, or when she was there that he'd make sure he was gone, and he tried his best to stay away from her. And he's trying to be careful, and maybe he's trying to outlive the temptation. I don't know, but he's made up in his mind that he's not going to do it. And he's made up in his mind that he's going to live right. Now, with the initial temptation, Joseph, he could talk his way out. In the initial temptation, when she said, lie with me, Joseph kind of reasoned with her, and he said, we don't need to do this. And so evidently she backed off, at least for that time. And as time goes on, day by day, she's thinking more and more about it. She's trying to get him to think more and more about it, but he ain't going to. He ain't entertaining the thought. And so finally, in Genesis chapter 39, in verse 11 and 12, it says, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men in the house there within. And she caught him by the garment and saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. If reason won't work and routine won't work, then the next thing to do is run. Paul told Timothy, he said, flee youthful lust. And again, we need that insulation, not necessarily isolation. Now, you need the isolation till you get the insulation so that you can go out. The Bible says that we're to let our light so shine before men. We're to be, let our light shine. Peter says, that we're to be lights in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. Well, the only way we're going to let our light shine in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation is to be there. You got people that, they think being spiritual is building a monastery and staying up on a mountain away from everybody else. That may do good for a little while, and you may feel better, but you ain't accomplishing anything. And so you need to be able to get out there amongst them. You need to be able to get out there and be a witness and be a testimony. But the thing that's going to keep you from that daily temptation, and it gets old, I'm telling you, it gets old. It gets old day by day, it gets old. But if you've got that close walk with the Lord, draw nigh to God, and he'll draw nigh to you. Resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. The best way to resist the devil is to draw nigh to God. And if you'll draw nigh to God, he'll draw nigh to you, and he'll give you the strength to have the victory over that sin. Well, I don't know who needed that, but I hope it helped you, and I hope you have a great day. If I can help you with anything, get in touch with me. Drop me a line. I'll be glad to help you if I can. Maybe you got some unsaved kin folks need praying for, need visiting. I'll be glad to do it. God bless you, neighbor. Have a great day. Where's the button? There it is.